So it's titled The Subjunctive with Conjunctions, assuming we even know what we're talking about when we say conjunctions, which is why I don't love the book, because this has no meaning to us. This is using a grammatical term to categorize another grammar concept isn't very meaningful. If we don't have meaning with the grammar, then the grammar is not going to sink in. We're not going to understand it. We have to have meaning, which is why we started class talking about problems in the environment. And we're going to connect that, and I'm going to use my personal example to present this concept. Like I was saying before we started this, and I'm going to do a lot of this in English because a lot of this, like I was saying, it's pretty ambiguous. The previous uses of the subjunctive that we've seen have been following a specific order, a specific pattern. We have these phrases, and if they're not followed by a K, we'll just use the infinitive. But if they're followed by a K, we're either going to use the indicative or the subjunctive. If those phrases fall under doubt, emotion, recommendation, or impersonal expressions, then we use the subjunctive. And if they don't, then we'll just use the indicative form of the verb. So right now, self-evaluate, do I get that yes or no? And if the answer is no, you need to come talk to me before our test next week or go to the foreign language tutoring lab, because now we're going to take it to the next level and we're going to look at a different use of the subjunctive in a less obvious way, okay? There's no connector K and phrases and things like that. Now we're going to look at these words that are classified as conjunctions. Okay, but before we do, I'm not just going to explain to you what the concept is, because that's what the book does, and that's what that little cartoon does on the super site and the grammar tutorial, which, like I said, doesn't provide a lot of meaning. I like to present the grammar with meaning and in context, and based on what we've been doing in class, which is talking about the environment, which is talking about, in this case, an environmental problem, and what we do to help better that problem or reduce or resolve that problem. So like I was saying, yo voy al trabajo por bicicleta para conservar energía, okay? So as we can see, and just to recycle what we learned last fall, por and para, right? So I'm going to identify por and para here and review a little bit of por and para, because that might help clarify even further, building on what you already know, and why we're using the infinitive conservar. Okay, so en sus papeles necesitan copiar conservar, and you can highlight para, not necessarily por, but para. But let me point out por first. We're using por here because why? Do you remember the rule with por and bicicleta? Por tren, por carro, por bus, por Uber, por Lyft, por taxi, por avión. We use por with what? All those examples with por bicicleta. Por is being used.
Like by, or like, is that right?
Indication of direction.
It translates as by bike, by train, by bus, by plane. And all those examples are using por with modes of transportation. Right, exactly. Well, whenever we refer to how we got somewhere, and we're using a preposition, we're going to use por with a mode of transportation. And last fall we talked about infinitives, and we can use por or para with infinitives. But this chapter, you don't need to take it that far. If you see para in the blank, like on the super site, you are simply going to use the infinitive form of para. And just to review what we talked about last fall, para with an infinitive, especially in this context, para conservar energía is saying what? Para conservar energía?
For the purpose.
Purpose. Muy bien. Excelente. Purpose. Remember? Para with purpose? Hopefully you remember this from last fall. It's kind of like in order to. To, because we're using the infinitive, right? Conservar, to conserve. No? ¿Entienden? And just to reiterate, when we use infinitives, we're using infinitives because we're not stating specifically who's conserving energy. You know, infinitives are used when we're very general. Although I'm talking about myself, I'm not talking about, you know, so that, you know, Charleston.
You yourself are not conserving energy.
Right, I'm just saying in order to. It's a little bit general, okay? That verb, not ir, but conservar, okay? So bear with me as we progress, because I'm going to go back to this para when we see in this next example, and as you can see, letra B in sus papeles. So now we're using para again, so you definitely want to maybe highlight that on your papers while you also copy aprendan, okay? And I'm going to give you a second to do that. And as you're doing that, start thinking. We're using para again. But what's changed about para here? What's para que? And why would I use para que here instead of just para? Why have I introduced or used que? What does que function as? What do we know about que? A que does what? Connects, right. Why am I connecting? Why wouldn't I just say para aprender?
It's two full statements.
I'm connecting, I'm introducing what? I'm talking about myself, right? Voy al trabajo, I'm talking about myself. But now I'm introducing a new subject, right? Somebody else. Who am I talking about here? My kids, right? And like I said, this is not a picture of me. I did this last year and I didn't have a picture of us on the cargo bike. Now I do, but I just didn't take the time to update the images. But that's what I do. They're in the front and we all commute. They go to preschool in Wentworth. I drop them off and then I come here. There's lots of reasons why we do this. But also I want to show them that we don't have to be reliant on cars exclusively, you know, just because that's the status quo in the United States. So because in order to express that idea, I'm doing it to conserve energy also. But there's another reason. I want to be a good example for my children in terms of the environment and alternative modes of transportation and not relying on cars and oil and gas. I mean, I drive. It's not like I'm anti-car. I'm just saying. So in order to convey that idea and the effect on my children, I have to now, I can't just say para with an infinitive because now I'm being more specific. Does that make sense? Does that make sense why I'm using para que? And when I do that, what happens? Aprendan. ¿Cuál es el infinitivo de aprendan? Aprender. Exactly. So the rule is when we use para que and we introduce a new subject, we're going to conjugate our subsequent verb in the subjunctive. Aprender, aprendan. Okay? So para que, and you can see on this list that we're ultimately going to get to, is a conjunction that is going to introduce the subjunctive. But remember, if it just is para, and we don't have a new subject, we know after prepositions, de, por, para, a, sometimes we use infinitives. Keeps it very general. But if I want to make it more specific, who's learning? My children. I have to use para que. ¿Entienden? See? Okay, so careful with that on the super site. And this is just breaking it down. Subjunctive, para que, infinitive, para. Okay? ¿Entienden? All right. Otro ejemplo. Still talking about bike riding in Charleston. Okay? Antes de ir en bicicleta, siempre nos ponemos los cascos. ¿Cómo se dice cascos? Helmets. Right. Exactly. Cascos. All right. Antes de ir is saying what? Yeah, before going. Sometimes when we use prepositions with infinitives, we're keeping it very general. I'm not talking about who's going. You don't even know who I'm talking about until we see siempre nos ponemos. And then you know we're talking about we. But antes de, prepositions, de, por, para, etc., are always followed by infinitives. They can be followed by nouns, but we're not going to conjugate verbs after prepositions. Antes de ir, before going is how it translates, but we don't use ing in Spanish only unless we're stating actions in progress. Antes de ir, nothing happens here. It's very general and then it becomes specific here, but this is the indicative. There's no subjunctive here, okay? ¿Entienden? However, recycling what we just talked about with para que and applying it to this new concept, antes de what? What happened here?
We added a K,
I have a K. And what do we know about K?
makes everything subjective.
It's a connector. Exactly. It doesn't make everything subjunctive because we can say like, tengo un amigo que habla español. But with certain phrases or certain words, para que, antes de que. What is antes de que salgamos el campos? What's this saying? What does antes de mean again? Before. Everybody, it's a very common error to confuse it with after, but remember A comes before
Antechamber.
D, before, in the alphabet. So antes means before and después actually means after. Just try to remember that. But before we what? Before we leave. And now, notice here, not only am I using the subjunctive, but why am I using the subjunctive? I have K, and the reason why I've introduced K is because, am I saying salir? Is it general? No, I can't use the infinitive. I'm being specific. We leave campus today. Vamos a ponernos los cascos otra vez. Okay? The next verb is in the indicative. It only affects the verb right after, unless I'm, saying and or. Okay? Salgamos, salir, subjuntivo. ¿Entienden? So not only copy, but highlight the antes de que, or emphasize the que part. Otro ejemplo. So antes de ir, and después also applies. And we'll take a look at después. I can't remember. A moment. So después, we know antes means what again? Before. Después means, what does después mean? After. Right, exactly. Después de. So notice we use the infinitive to state what? What are we saying here? Después de regresar a casa? After what? What does regresar mean?
After going to the house.
Returning, right? Returning home, which is pretty general. You don't know who I'm talking about. I mean, obviously, if you connect all these sentences, you know who I'm talking about. But remember, después de, infinitive, very general. However, here, después de que. And what happened here? We conjugated the verb because why? Que. And I'm conjugating my verb. I want to use que because I want to what? Versus regresar. Regresar is very general. But I want to do what? Be specific. I want to indicate who returns home after we get home, okay? I'm only choosing to use the subjunctive or conjugate the verb and include que because I just want to specify, okay? That's the speaker or the writer's idea that they're trying to convey, and therefore I do that. Regresemos. Antes de que salgamos, subjuntivo. Después de que regresemos, subjuntivo. ¿Entienden? It's only because I just want to specify. And therefore, I have to use the subjunctive. It's just a rule. Nos quitamos los cascos. Otro ejemplo, menos obvio. Okay, so we have para, antes de, después de. We throw K's on there, and then we put them in the subjunctive. ¿Entienden? Okay, so on the superset, if you see para, you're just going to throw in the infinitive, or de, infinitive. But if you see the K, you know to put it in the subjunctive. That's pretty clear. But now we get a little bit more ambiguous. And this is where vocab comes in. Llevamos los cascos. Llevamos los cascos. ¿Y cómo se dice cascos? Helmets, no? En caso de que, this one's not that hard to remember. Choquemos con otro carro. O que tengamos un accidente. So, even though my subjects are the same, I'm connecting not only with K, but I'm connecting with K twice, because I have this O. That's applying in caso, which I could have repeated. What does in caso probably mean? It's very similar to English.
In case?
In case. In case. In case we what? Why do we wear helmets?
We get fall or have an accident.
What is choquemos con otro carro? Crash, right? Remember that verb from last fall? Chocar. Choquemos con otro carro. Or tengamos, tener, subjuntivo. En caso de que subjuntivo. ¿Entienden? ¿Sí? ¿Está claro? Okay. No podemos proteger nuestros cerebros. What are cerebros? Brains, right? Proteger nuestros cerebros. We should have learned that when we learned body parts last fall, but we just didn't get that specific. But brain's not really that hard to remember in Spanish, is it? What is, even though the word cerebro doesn't look like the word brain, yeah, exactly.
Based on
It connects with what we know about science in the brain and parts of the brain. And reference, scientific, medical reference to the brain. Sin que. Without looking in your book, what could you conclude or guess this is saying? Without, right, exactly. And we know what word by itself means without. Con means with. Sin means without. Sin and con are also prepositions like de and para and por. So if we didn't have the que, we would use the infinitive. But here, if we're using a verb, here's another que. So what happened? Subjuntivo. Nos pongamos nuestros cascos. Tener, tengamos. Poner, pongamos. Reflexivo, because we're putting it on ourselves. Nos pongamos. ¿Entienden? See? Okay. So hopefully you're picking up on the grammar and the subliminal message that I'm trying to emphasize here in terms of wearing your helmet and protecting your brain. If you know anybody who's had a brain injury, they'll tell you, take care of that brain. Okay, otro ejemplo. Siempre llevo mi casco, a menos que yo esté en mi casa.
I always carry my helmet.
I always wear it. And what do we know about menos? Más or menos? Más means what? More. Menos means less. But a menos que is a little bit more specific than less. It's more like unless. Unless. Again, another que. Subjuntivo. Esté. En mi casa or esté en mi trabajo. I don't like walk around wearing my helmet all day long. I'm not that paranoid about my brain. I'm not that clumsy that I would need to wear a helmet full time. A menos que, okay? Just to emphasize the use of that phrase, because you really have to know what they mean, not just with the que. Subjuntivo, esté. Entonces, para resumir, les recomiendo que monten, ¿no? Subjuntivo de montar, and just to reiterate what we've already learned, why am I using subjunctive?
It's a recommendation.
Right, les recomiendo que monten. I'm not just saying recomiendo montar, which would be very general and being specific. I'm telling who to wear their helmets. Yeah, who I'm talking to. Y'all, ustedes, okay? En sus bicicletas, con tal de que llevan sus cascos. So we know we've got a que. What does con tal de mean? That's like así que or provided that, which is not very obvious at all. This would be one you need to study and you need to learn. It's pretty ambiguous. Con tal de que, provided that. Provided that you what? I recommend that you ride your bikes
Provided that you wear your helmet.
Provided that you wear your helmets, right? As long as. It's kind of like as long as, if that is less obscure than provided that. As long as you all. So K, just to reiterate who I'm talking about, who's wearing their helmets. Okay, so you have to memorize and know that all of these phrases, which are nice because they have the K's, that all of these phrases are used with the subjunctive. And we use the K's because we're going to introduce a new subject, but you need to know en caso de que means what? ¿Cómo se dice en caso de que? In case. In case, right? Sin que?
Without.
Mm-hmm. Con tal de que?
Provided that.
Provided that, as long as.
Unless.
Menos is unless. Menos, less. Unless. Para que?
By that or because of that.
Más or menos. Para que is kind of like para with an infinitive, like para aprender español necesitan practicar. In order to, right. So that. Really, I mean, para que, just to translate, it'd be like so that. But really, it's like so they, or as long as they, or in order to by itself with the infinitive, but para que, so that. And then antes de que and después de que. I don't know why. It just doesn't really fit. Después de que.
After that.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't work with our acronym, escapa. You can't escape the subjunctive. Después de que.
If there's one more A, you do escapada.
Mm-hmm. I know, but we don't have it. Just remember, después de que is also introduces the subjunctive. Okay, so everybody clear with that before I move on to the next one, and then we'll practice. Everybody feels good. You see these K's with these prepositions, you use the subjunctive. Try to memorize what they mean. Because now it's going to get more ambiguous over on this other side. Future events. Remember how I was saying in class on Monday, there is no future conjugation of the subjunctive. So, unless you use a phrase like en el futuro, how do you know you're referring to the future? And so, when you determine whether or not to use a subjunctive with these phrases, you have to reflect as to whether or not there's a reference to the future. And if there is, you'll use a subjunctive, and if there isn't, you're not going to use a subjunctive. So it's the same, like, words and everything. It's just based, are we referring to the future or not? Futuro or no? That's what we're trying to decide. Mis hijos y yo, siempre. So right off the bat, futuro or no? Siempre?
No.
No, because siempre means what?
Always.
Always. So this, I'm not referring to the future. I'm just saying we always, what? Wear our helmets when we ride our bikes. This is just habitual actions, right? Cuando. Like, siempre hablo español cuando estoy en clase. Hablo, estoy, cuando, en general. Okay? ¿Entienden? This is like Spanish 102, 201. We know how to, we've been writing sentences like this, conveying this idea all along. Now let's see how the subjunctive is used with cuando. Cuando mis hijos sean grandes. Okay, so on the supersite, you're going to have to put this in. Right now, it's clear that sean is the subjunctive of what? Ser. It's irregular, so yeah, profeceta, it's subjunctive. But why? How do you know I'm referring to the future here? Remember, that's what we're trying to determine. What do you know about my kids? En grandes. When they're bigger, right, exactly. They're little. They're 3 and 5 years old. They're little. But when they're bigger. So this is what indicates the future here, which is why our verb after cuando is going to be in the subjunctive. Creo que van a llevar sus cascos. Okay? Well, they write it. They wear them. They don't object to wearing their helmets ever because it's so habitual, but I feel confident when I'm not around to tell them, put on your helmet, that they still will. Cuando sean grandes. Okay? ¿Entienden? So you're looking for that reference, that implied understanding that we're talking about the future with cuando, okay? Otro ejemplo. La contaminación del aire continúa hasta que encontremos otras formas de energía. Futuro or no? That's first what we're identifying. Before we even examine the grammar, we need to understand the context. Is this a reference to the future or not?
Yes.
After or like the hasta que? So what's this saying? Contaminación del aire. Air pollution will, we're basically saying,
Continue.
yeah, it's going to continue. Hasta que, hasta mañana, hasta el viernes. When we say hasta,
Later or after.
really when we're saying like hasta mañana or hasta el viernes, we're saying until, right? So hasta means until with the K, until we what?
Come up with.
Yeah, or find. Encontrar means to find. It's like encounter, which is kind of a synonym to find. Otras formas de energía. So since we're referring to the future, we haven't completely eliminated air pollution. Since we are referring to the future and we have hasta que, we're going to use a subjunctive. Otro ejemplo. Antes muchas personas no reciclaban. Muchas personas no reciclaban. What am I saying here? Antes muchas personas no reciclaban.
Before, not
Yeah.
before recycling.
Before, earlier in time, lots of people didn't used to recycle. Imperfecto. So obviously, I'm using verbs in the past tense, and therefore we know we're not referring to what? The future. So notice we're just using the indicative, and remember the preterite is still the indicative. Construyó centros del gobierno, until the government built. Preterite and imperfect. Okay? Indicative. No need for subjunctive. We're not referring to the future. Uno más. Sin embargo, la deforestación va a continuar. What's this saying? Is going to continue. Which is clearly what? A reference to the future. Therefore, after our hasta que, we have what? Reciclen su papel. Okay? Subjuntivo. So when you do your super site assignments, there's a lot that you're going to apply. It's a lot. And you really need to reference your notes. But when you get to these ones, on this side, under this category, cuando, en cuanto a, hasta que, y tan pronto como, you're trying to determine if you're referring to the future or not. This is a different classification than these conjunctions. These don't have anything to do with the future, but these do, and if they do, they'll use a subjunctive. ¿Entienden? Okay, vamos a pausar aquí.